I was 39 weeks pregnant when Jason asked me to sign the papers. We were in the living room, and I was pacing between contractions, swaying like I'd learned in the prenatal classes. The baby was coming early. I could feel it. My lower back ached, my ribs throbbed, and my ankles were swollen beyond recognition. But more than anything, I was terrified. Not of the pain. I could handle pain. What scared me was the thought of something going wrong, of our baby entering a world where her father already seemed so elsewhere. Jason sat at the kitchen counter, laptop open, fingers flying across the keys. He barely looked up when I called his name. "Babe," I said, breath hitching through a contraction. "I think we should go soon." He glanced at his watch, then at me. "You've said that 3 times in the past hour. Your water hasn't broken yet." "I know, but the contractions are 5 minutes apart now." He sighed like I was being dramatic. Then, as if remembering something important, he stood up and walked over to the drawer where we kept documents and bills. "Actually, before we go, can you sign something for me real quick?" I blinked. "Now?" "It's just some bank paperwork," he said, already pulling the folder out. "Refinancing stuff. You know, all this maternity leave stuff complicates the mortgage. It's just temporary. We'll transfer everything back after. I just need your signature to get it through underwriting." My head was spinning. "Can it wait?" "No," he said, placing the papers on the coffee table. "The deadline is today. Just sign here and here, and one more on this page." I wanted to say no. I should have said no. But he was calm, matter of fact. He kissed my forehead and placed a pen in my hand. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important," he said gently. And in that moment, between pain and panic, I chose to trust him. He was my husband. The man I had shared a bed with for 7 years. The father of the child I was about to bring into the world. I couldn't believe he would ever do anything to hurt me. I signed. A few minutes later, my water broke. The drive to the hospital was a blur. Jason was unusually quiet. He didn't hold my hand at the red lights like he used to. He didn't joke nervously or make small talk to distract me from the contractions. He just drove, lips pressed into a hard line, eyes fixed on the road like I wasn't even there. We arrived at the hospital just past midnight. The nurse asked if I had a birthing plan. Jason stood at the foot of the bed, scrolling on his phone. I whispered that yes. I wanted delayed cord clamping. No epidural, if I could bear it, and my husband by my side. "He's here, right?" she asked kindly. I nodded, though I wasn't so sure anymore. As the hours dragged on and the contractions sharpened into something feral, I reached for his hand and found empty space. Jason was gone. He stepped out to take a call, the nurse told me. He said he'd be back soon. But he didn't come back. Not for the birth, not for the tears, not for the screaming that tore through me as Ava entered the world. I gave birth alone. I held our daughter in my arms, sobbing with equal parts joy and abandonment. She was perfect, tiny and squirming and angry at the cold light of the world. I whispered apologies into her wet hair, telling her I was sorry she had to meet the world like this, that her father should have been the first one to hold her, not a nurse. When Jason finally showed up, it was 11 a.m. the next morning. He walked into the room with a half-hearted bouquet and a sheepish smile. "Traffic," he mumbled. I wanted to scream, but I was too exhausted. My body had been torn apart. My heart was already bleeding. He kissed Ava's forehead, then looked at me with a kind of indifference that chilled me. "She looks like you," he said. I nodded. "Where were you?" He blinked. "I told you, work emergency." "During the birth of your daughter?" He shrugged. I didn't know it would happen so fast. I should have known then. The man I married was gone. Or maybe he'd never been the man I thought he was. Maybe the man who made me laugh until my stomach hurt, who used to cook breakfast shirtless and call me his forever. Maybe that man was just a story I'd told myself to sleep at night. But I was tired and alone, and I had a newborn in my arms who needed me more than I needed answers. So I let it go. I shouldn't have. A week later, when Jason suggested we stay at his mother's house just for a while because of some construction issues at home, I nodded in silence. When I asked to stop by the house to get some of my clothes and Ava's baby monitor, he said he'd go himself and bring them later. When I started asking too many questions, he brushed them off with a kiss and a patronizing, "You just rest, I've got it covered." And I believed him, because I didn't yet know what I'd really signed that night. Not yet, but I would. And when I found out the man I had once given my life to, he wouldn't recognize the woman who stood in front of him. There's a kind of silence that falls in a delivery room when the father doesn't show up. It's not loud. No one says anything. The nurses don't ask. The doctor doesn't comment. But it's there, in the way they glance at the empty chair beside you, in the way they hold your hand a second longer, like they know you're alone even if you haven't said it out loud. I lay there under the harsh hospital lights, gripping the bed rails as another contraction ripped through me. Sweat soaked through the back of my gown, my breathing ragged, my heart pounding. And all I could think was, he promised me he'd be here. Jason had always made big promises. He said he'd never let me face anything alone. Said he'd be there, every second, holding my hand through every scream and tear. But now that it mattered, really mattered, he was gone. A nurse named Leah stood by my side, gently pressing a cold cloth to my forehead. "You're doing great, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're not alone. We're here." And they were, but they weren't him. At 3:16 a.m., I screamed so hard I thought my voice might shatter. And just like that, Ava arrived. Tiny, wet, wailing. They placed her on my chest, and I wept, not just from pain or joy, but grief. Because in the moment that should have been the most beautiful of my life, the man I loved wasn't there to witness it. He wasn't there to cut the cord. He wasn't there to whisper her name. He just wasn't. The next morning, he walked in like nothing had happened. I was sitting up in bed, Ava asleep in the bassinet beside me. My eyes were swollen from crying, my arms aching from holding her all night long. And there he was, strolling in with coffee and a cheap bouquet like we were meeting for brunch. "Morning," he said, offering a sheepish grin. "Where were you?" I asked, voice low. He sat in the chair beside me, sipping his drink. "Work, I told you. Something urgent came up." "You missed the birth, Jason." He nodded, as if he was agreeing that yes, it had been inconvenient. "I didn't think it would happen that fast." "I told you. I called you. I texted you." He shrugged. "I didn't hear my phone." I stared at him, and for the first time I realized he didn't feel bad. He wasn't apologizing. He was annoyed. Annoyed that I was making it a thing. We were discharged that afternoon. I held Ava close as Jason loaded the car seat, grumbling about how complicated the straps were. The entire drive home, I sat in the back seat beside her, my hand gently resting on her chest to feel her breathing. My daughter. Mine. Not ours. Not anymore. When we reached the house, Jason didn't pull into our driveway. Instead, he drove past it. "Where are we going?" I asked. "To my mom's," he replied. "Just for a week or two. She wants to help." "But the house..." "There's some stuff going on," he cut me off. "Construction, mold or something. It's not safe right now. Let's just go to mom's, okay?" I turned to look at him. "When did this happen? Couple days ago? And you didn't tell me? You were having a baby. I didn't want to stress you out." I didn't say anything after that. I just stared out the window, watching our house, the one we picked out together, the one I decorated with dreams and Pinterest boards, fade in the rearview mirror. Life at his mother's house was suffocating. She meant well, I think. But her way of helping was to criticize everything I did. The way I held Ava, the way I fed her, the way I breathed. Jason, of course, didn't say a word. He was always running errands, always on a call, always disappearing for hours with no explanation. One night, while Ava cried endlessly from colic and I rocked her for what felt like the 100th hour, Jason walked in and looked annoyed. "Can't you get her to stop?" "She's a baby," I snapped. "She's your baby." He exhaled sharply. This wasn't how I pictured things. I laughed bitterly. "Oh, I'm sorry. Is the reality of parenthood not living up to your fantasy?" He stormed out. That night, after Ava finally fell asleep, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. My body still ached from birth. My stitches stung. My breasts were sore from breastfeeding. And my heart, it was a hollow drum, echoing with everything I didn't want to admit. Jason wasn't with me anymore. Not really. Something had shifted. Something had gone. And the house, the home we shared, the one I hadn't stepped into since the day we left for the hospital, loomed large in my mind. I needed to go back. I needed to see it, touch it, remind myself that it was still mine. I didn't know yet that the locks had changed, that the deed no longer bore my name, that the man I loved had done something unforgivable, but I would, soon. It had been almost 3 weeks since we left the hospital. 3 weeks of navigating motherhood while quietly grieving a relationship that was beginning to rot from the inside. 3 weeks of pretending everything was normal while feeling like a ghost in my own life. Jason had all but disappeared, physically, emotionally. His mother and I existed in a kind of awkward truce, trading baby care responsibilities without warmth or understanding. I was the mother, but I felt like a guest. Or worse, a burden. That morning, Jason left early. He claimed he had a few meetings, but he didn't say where. He didn't kiss Ava goodbye, didn't even glance at her before walking out the door. And something in me cracked. I looked around the small guest room, Ava cooing softly beside me in her bassinet. There were piles of laundry on the floor, bottles drying on the windowsill, my maternity jeans folded on the edge of the bed. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a waiting room for a life that wasn't mine anymore. I needed to breathe. I needed my house. Our house. So I packed Ava into her car seat, wrapped her in a soft blanket, and drove. The neighborhood looked the same. Tree-lined streets, kids on bikes, that familiar hum of quiet suburbia. But as I turned onto our block, I felt a strange chill creep up my spine. Something felt off. The driveway was empty, which made me feel a little relieved. Jason wasn't home. I parked by the curb, took Ava in my arms, and walked up to the front door. My front door. And that's when I saw it. The welcome mat was gone. The one with "Home Sweet Home" that we'd picked out together. In its place was a new one. Dark gray, simple, unfamiliar. The potted plant by the steps was missing too. Still, I told myself maybe Jason had tossed it. Maybe his mother wanted something more modern. I pulled out my key, slid it into the lock, and it didn't turn. I frowned, tried again. Still nothing. I tried the other key, the one we kept as backup. Nothing. A slow panic bloomed in my chest. I stepped back and looked at the house, really looked at it. There were new curtains in the windows, different colors, different textures. Not mine, not ours. I called Jason, straight to voicemail. I texted him, "Why did you change the locks? I'm at the house. I need to get in. Call me, now." No response. I stood on the porch for a full 10 minutes, Ava gurgling softly against my chest, while I stared at the door I used to walk through every day. I felt like a stranger trespassing on my own life. A neighbor walked by and gave me a puzzled look. "Hi, Emily. Everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, just forgot my keys, I think." She nodded politely and kept walking, but I could feel her gaze lingering. That's when I called the locksmith. He arrived 20 minutes later, young, awkward, sympathetic. "You sure this is your house, ma'am?" "Yes," I said, tightening my grip on Ava. "It's under my name, or it was." He looked at me like he wanted to say something more, but nodded and got to work. When he finally cracked the door open, I stepped inside, and my heart stopped. Everything was gone. Gone. The furniture, the pictures on the walls, the tiny baby socks I'd folded neatly in the nursery, all of it erased. In its place were sleek leather chairs, minimalist art, a different smell in the air, perfume, sharp and floral. Someone had moved in. Someone else. I stepped further inside, Ava sleeping soundly against me, as if she knew I needed the stillness. My chest tightened with every step. Each corner felt like a betrayal. I walked into the kitchen. The appliances were the same, but the magnets on the fridge were different. The mugs in the cupboard weren't mine. And then, sitting right on the counter, was a stack of mail. I sifted through it, heart pounding, credit card offers, store flyers, a postcard, all addressed to Jason White and Isabel Lang. Isabel. The name hit me like a slap. Jason's childhood friend. The one he said I was being paranoid about. The one who used to call late at night, laugh a little too long on the phone. The one who sent him memes and pictures of her dog, and once, a photo of her in a bikini as a joke. I remembered the arguments. She's just a friend. You're being insecure. You're imagining things. And now, she was living in my home. I turned around and walked straight out the front door. The locksmith was waiting on the porch. "Everything okay?" he asked. I nodded, numb. "Yeah, thanks. Can you change the locks again?" He hesitated. "Legally, I can't, unless your name is still on the deed." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" He looked at me with apologetic eyes. "I checked the records to confirm ownership. The house was transferred last month. Sole owner, Jason White. I nearly dropped Ava. The papers. The ones I signed before labor. The ones I didn't read. The ones he gave me while I was in pain and scared and trusting him completely. That was when I knew. I had signed away the house, and he had given it to her. I don't remember the drive back to Jason's mother's house. I must have made the turns, must have stopped at red lights. But my hands were shaking the whole time, and Ava stirred against my chest like she could sense something shifting in me. The numbness I'd felt in the house had begun to harden into something darker, an ache I didn't yet have words for. It was the kind of pain that didn't scream. It just sat quietly, poisoning everything. I held Ava tighter. I needed to feel her weight. I needed to remember that I still had something that was mine. Jason wasn't home when I returned. His mother was watching TV, completely unfazed. She glanced at me, then back at the screen. Not a word. I walked upstairs, closed the bedroom door, and sat on the floor with Ava in my arms. She looked up at me with those dark, trusting eyes, and I nearly broke. How do you protect a child from a storm that started in your own bed? How do you build safety when the person who promised it to you burns it to the ground? I laid her in her bassinet, then pulled out the folder Jason had given me to sign that night. It was still in my hospital bag, untouched since. I had been too tired, too sore, too distracted to revisit it. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first few pages looked like what he said, loan adjustments, financial updates. Then, buried in the middle, I found it. Quitclaim deed, my name, his name, a signature line, mine. He hadn't lied completely. It was just paperwork, just a little something to sign before pushing a human out of my body, just the home I had spent 4 years renovating, decorating, pouring my life into. I had handed it over to him, like a gift. And he knew exactly what he was doing. When Jason finally came home that night, I was waiting in the living room. Calm. Cold. He looked surprised to see me awake. "You okay?" I held up the folder. He didn't flinch. "You want to explain this?" He shrugged off his coat and tossed it on the couch like we were about to have another one of our usual disagreements. Like I'd yell, he'd deflect, and by the end of it, I'd be the one apologizing for feeling too much. But not this time. "Don't look at me like that," he said, loosening his tie. "It's not what you think." "Oh?" I said, my voice sharp. "Because it looks like you used the night I gave birth to steal our house and hand it over to your mistress." He scoffed. "Mistress? Seriously?" "I saw her," I snapped. "She's living in my house, sleeping in my bed, drinking from my mugs." Jason walked into the kitchen and poured himself a drink. "Emily, calm down." The casualness of it made me want to scream. "I'm not going to calm down. You lied. You manipulated me. You let me think I was signing something for the mortgage, and you took everything." He leaned against the counter and took a sip of whiskey. "We needed to transfer it anyway. Legally, it made sense." "For who?" He didn't answer. And that silence told me everything. There are moments in life when you can feel something inside you die. A last flicker of trust, a last ember of love. I felt it in that kitchen. Felt it in the way he wouldn't look at me. Wouldn't admit what he'd done. He didn't even have the decency to lie well. "You planned this," I whispered. "Didn't you?" He didn't respond, just took another drink. The next morning, I packed Ava's things. Jason's mother watched from the doorway. "Where are you going?" "Somewhere safe." She opened her mouth to say something, maybe to defend him, maybe to shame me. But then she looked at Ava, and for once, said nothing. I didn't slam the door when I left. I didn't cry. I just walked away. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I drove straight to the county records office, waited in line, Ava asleep in her carrier. When it was my turn, I handed the clerk my ID and asked for the property file on our address. She pulled it up, printed the paperwork, and handed it to me without a word. There it was, black and white. Jason White, sole owner, effective date, the day I gave birth. I stared at the date until the ink blurred in my vision. I left the office and sat in the car, stunned. Everything was real. No more doubts, no more denial. Jason had orchestrated this with the precision of someone who had spent months, maybe years, laying the foundation. The fake support, the manipulation, the vanishing bank activity, the cold distance. He hadn't just cheated on me. He calculated my weakest moment, my labor, and used it as the door through which to steal my life. And now he was standing behind that door, pretending nothing had happened. Well, that door was about to open again. And next time, I wouldn't be walking in with blind trust. I'd be walking in with fire. The first time I saw her step out of my house, I stood frozen on the sidewalk, Ava in my arms, barely breathing. Isabel. She wore my old university sweatshirt, the one Jason used to steal from my closet, claiming it was the softest thing in the world. The one I wore on Saturday mornings when we'd make pancakes and listen to jazz in the kitchen. The one I once found bunched up in the laundry after a weekend trip. Jason told me he brought it along because it smelled like home. Now it was on her. Her slim frame, her red-tipped nails wrapped around the stainless steel door handle of my front door. She laughed as she stepped out, tucking a strand of her honey blonde hair behind her ear. She looked rested, fed, safe. She looked like someone who belonged there. I stood on the curb, the sidewalk scorching through my shoes, Ava shifting in my arms, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if I was going to scream or drop to my knees. Because this wasn't a betrayal that happened behind closed doors. This was a public spectacle. Jason stepped out behind her a moment later, his hand on her lower back, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He said something casual, flirty, and she tilted her head back and laughed like she'd never had to try in her life. Then he leaned down, kissed her temple, and they walked together down the porch steps like they were heading to brunch. They didn't see me. Not yet, but I saw everything. I didn't mean to confront them then. I wasn't ready. Emotionally, strategically, not even logistically. I hadn't yet met with the lawyer. I didn't even know where I was staying that night. But the fire rose before I could stop it. I crossed the street like I had every right in the world, because I did. When I reached the sidewalk in front of the house, I said his name like it was a dare. "Jason." They both turned, his face drained of color, hers twisted into something between annoyance and amusement. "Emily," he said quickly, stepping forward, hands raised like I was a wild animal. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" I echoed. "I live here. Or did you forget?" Isabel folded her arms. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." I ignored her. "This is my house." Jason's voice dropped, low and firm. "Emily, don't do this. Not in front of her." "In front of her?" I asked. "Your mistress?" Isabel scoffed. "Excuse me. No, you don't get to speak right now," I said, my voice steady. "You're wearing my clothes, sleeping in my bed, living in the house I paid to renovate. The least you can do is shut up and listen." Jason reached for my arm. "Can we talk somewhere else?" "No," I said, stepping back. "We'll talk right here." I looked him in the eye, and for the first time, I saw something crack. He wasn't expecting this version of me. The one who didn't beg. The one who didn't cry. "You made me sign those papers the night I went into labor," I said. "You used the birth of our child to rob me." He opened his mouth, closed it, glanced at Isabel like she might save him. She didn't. "You said it was for the mortgage. You said I could trust you." Silence. And then, in the smallest voice, he said, "I didn't think you'd find out like this." That sentence. Not, "I'm sorry," not, "I regret it," not even denial. Just damage control. I could feel people watching from behind curtains. One neighbor watering her plants slowed her hand. A jogger passed and glanced over his shoulder. But I didn't care. I looked down at Ava, still asleep, and back up at him. "You stole from me," I said. "But what hurts more is that you didn't even flinch when you did it." Jason rubbed the back of his neck. "I needed to do what was best for everyone." "Everyone? You mean you and her?" He didn't answer. "You're a father," I said. "You looked into your daughter's face and still chose to betray the woman who carried her." Isabel shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should go." I looked at her. "One day, he'll do this to you too." She blinked. I stepped back. "Enjoy my house, Isabel. Enjoy it while it lasts." Then I turned, clutching Ava tight, and walked away. Not because I was defeated, but because I had just won something bigger than a house. Clarity. That night, I slept on a friend's couch. My lawyer appointment was first thing the next morning, and I was no longer scared, because now I wasn't trying to save a marriage. I was preparing for war. The office smelled like leather and stale coffee. There were thick legal books lining the shelves, too many for anyone to actually read, and a row of framed degrees on the wall behind the desk. The lawyer sitting across from me looked like the type of man who didn't waste time on sympathy. But when I told him why I was there, he paused and set his pen down. "You signed a quitclaim deed while in labor?" I nodded. Ava was asleep in her car seat beside me, her little chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. She was the only reason I was holding it together. The lawyer, Mr. Sandler, leaned forward. "Did you read the documents?" "No," I said, my throat dry. "Jason told me it was for the mortgage. He said we needed to update the paperwork because of my maternity leave." I trusted him. He didn't nod or frown, just wrote something down in his legal pad. "And was there anyone else present when you signed?" "No, just him." He exhaled slowly. "This isn't uncommon. The law assumes adults are responsible for reading what they sign, even under stress. Proving coercion, especially without threats or witnesses, is difficult." My stomach twisted. "But I was in labor, in pain, vulnerable." He looked me in the eye, and he knew that. We went over the paperwork together, page by page. Sandler explained each clause in plain English, and with every paragraph, the truth became more grotesque. Jason had planned it meticulously. The deed had been notarized 2 days later, backdated to the day of my signature. The transfer was clean, legal, practically airtight. "I'm sorry," Sandler said. "He built this like a fortress." "But there has to be something," I insisted. "Some way to prove this wasn't done in good faith." "There might be," he said slowly. "But it's not about the house anymore. It's about intent, about pattern. If we can establish a timeline, show that he's been planning this, then we have leverage." "Leverage for what?" He looked at Ava, then back at me. "Custody, financial reparations, civil damages. You're not powerless, Emily, but we have to move strategically." I walked out of that office not with answers, but with resolve. Jason thought he won because he had a deed with my signature on it. What he didn't realize was that signatures don't erase the truth. They don't erase patterns of deceit. They don't erase what it feels like to sit in a room with a lawyer while your baby sleeps next to you and realize your entire marriage was a setup. I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to make sure he remembered every step of the fall. That night, I started digging. I pulled up old bank records, emails, shared folders. I logged into our budgeting app, one Jason thought I barely looked at, and started cross-referencing charges, transfers, investments. I was hunting. And what I found only added fuel to the fire. There were account withdrawals disguised as car maintenance from a shop that didn't exist, transfers to a checking account I didn't recognize until I traced the routing number back to Isabel's old employer. Gifts bought months ago, dinners billed as client meetings, and a monthly deposit into a savings account I never knew existed. Jason had been building his escape plan, one quiet transaction at a time. The house was just the finale. I met Sandler again 2 days later. I showed him everything: printed statements, flagged transactions, screenshots of texts Jason had sent me about work dinners on the same nights he'd booked hotel stays in her name. Sandler scanned the files, impressed. "You're thorough." "I was married to a liar," I said flatly. "You get good at seeing what's missing." He nodded. "This changes things. With this, we can make a case for fraud, marital misconduct, and misappropriation of joint assets." He leaned back, tapping his pen on the desk. "You're not just fighting for a house anymore. You're fighting for your daughter's future. For every woman who's ever been told to just trust a man with everything." I didn't say anything, but in that moment I realized I hadn't just been betrayed, I had been used. Jason had built a version of me in his head that would always say yes, always believe, always forgive. He was about to learn who I really was. I didn't sleep much after meeting with Sandler. While Ava napped, I traced every digital footprint Jason left behind, every email, text, and financial transfer. I wasn't trying to be a detective. I was just connecting the dots. It was like following a blood trail in a house I used to call safe. I wanted to believe it was just about the house, that he snapped, panicked, made one selfish choice. But the deeper I dug, the more I saw the truth. Jason hadn't just betrayed me. He had prepared to betray me. It started over a year ago. A new account opened in his name only, one I'd never seen before. At first, small transfers, a few hundred here, 1,000 there. The labels were vague: investment, future plans, tax buffer. Words meant to sound responsible, words meant to hide. But then came the big one. 6 weeks before Ava was born, Jason drained one of our joint savings accounts. $48,000. Gone in a single click. I remembered that week. He told me we had to tighten up spending. Claimed the market was unstable. Said he'd read something about looming economic shifts. That we needed to be smart. I believed him. I stopped buying anything that wasn't a necessity. I canceled prenatal massage appointments. I skipped buying the rocking chair I wanted for Ava's nursery. And meanwhile, he'd use that money to put a down payment on another property. Not for us. For her. I sat at the table that night with Ava in the crook of my arm, one hand typing, the other brushing her hair. My heart was burning, but I wasn't crying. I was planning. I opened a new document and titled it, "What He Took." I listed every withdrawal, every transfer, every line of credit that had been touched without my consent. I wrote down dates, descriptions, where I was in my pregnancy when it happened. I added screenshots, attached receipts, every dollar he took from our life together and funneled into his new one with her. Then I created a second file, What He Doesn't Know. This one was for everything I still had. My shares in a small marketing startup I'd quietly invested in years ago. My professional network, people who respected my work long before they ever met Jason. And Sandler, my lawyer, who was now crafting a case that would make Jason's smug little empire tremble. He thought I was weak. He thought I was too busy being a mother to fight back. But he forgot that motherhood doesn't make you soft. It makes you sharper. A few days later, I requested a mediation. Jason accepted, probably thinking we were about to talk it out. He'd always been good at manipulation in private. But now he'd have to face me in a room with a third party and a lawyer who didn't smile. We met in a downtown office. Gray walls, glass table, nothing warm about it. Jason showed up in a navy blazer, trying to look composed, confident. Isabel wasn't with him. I guessed he didn't want her in the room when the truth came to light. Sandler began. Let's begin with the matter of the property transfer, conducted while my client was in labor, unaware of the legal implications, and under duress. Jason's eyes narrowed. That's a stretch. Is it? Sandler smiled without humor. Then perhaps you can explain the transfers from your joint accounts, specifically the ones used to fund an undisclosed investment property in another woman's name. Jason stiffened. You went through my finances? No, I said. I went through our finances. Remember those? The ones you promised to share forever? His mouth opened, closed. Sandler slid the folder across the table. Here's everything we've compiled. Dates, amounts, destinations. A very clear picture of financial misconduct and marital fraud. Jason glanced at the mediator, trying to look calm. She's just emotional. She's exaggerating. Am I said. Because your emotional wife found your paper trail, your shell company, your down payment, and the text you sent Isabel calling me a deadweight. Want me to read it out loud? His face darkened. You hacked me. No, I said. You left the door open. I just walked through. That meeting ended without resolution. Jason stormed out halfway through. Sandler said it was a win. He's rattled. That's when men like him start slipping. I didn't feel like I'd won anything yet, but I did feel something return, something I hadn't felt in months. Control. Not over him, over me. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself differently. Not as the woman who'd been discarded, but as the woman who saw it all and chose not to stay silent. I kissed Ava's forehead and whispered a promise. Whatever he tried to take from us, I'll get back. But better than that, I'll build us something he can never touch. He showed up at my new apartment unannounced. No warning, no text, just the familiar knock, 3 slow taps against the door that once meant I'm home. I didn't open it right away. I stood still, Ava asleep in my arms, trying to decide if I had the strength to face him without fire consuming the room. Then came his voice. Emily, just talk to me. I cracked the door open just enough to see his face. He looked tired, not broken. Jason never broke, but strained. Eyes shadowed, jaw tense, like someone who finally realized the narrative had slipped out of his hands. I don't want to fight, he said. I just want to talk. I opened the door all the way. Not for him, but for me. He stepped inside, looking around. You did all this yourself? Yes, I said. You'd be surprised what I can do when no one's lying to me. He didn't respond. I gestured to the couch. Say what you came to say. Jason sat, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. I messed up. That's an understatement. He nodded. I panicked. I felt trapped. Everything was changing. Us, the baby, the pressure. I didn't know how to handle it. You handled it by transferring our house into your name and giving it to your girlfriend, I said flatly. He had the audacity to wince. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. He tried to soften his voice. Emily, I still care about you. I laughed. No, you care that I finally stopped caring about you. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. You used to fight for us. You used to come back. I looked at him. Really looked. This man I once planned to grow old with. You know what's funny? I said. I used to think giving up meant failure. That if I left, it meant I hadn't tried hard enough. So I kept forgiving. I kept fixing. I stayed, even when it hurt. I walked over to Ava's crib and gently adjusted her blanket muff. But you weren't trying. You weren't staying. I was holding up the whole marriage by myself. Jason's voice cracked. I didn't know how to be what you needed. No, I said, turning back to him. You didn't want to be. There's a difference. He stood. So what now? You already know what now, I replied. You're really going through with this? Court, custody, everything? Yes, I said. And not out of revenge, out of necessity. He stepped toward me, tone suddenly sharp. You think I'll just give up Ava? I didn't flinch. You already did. You left me alone in the hospital. You made her arrival all about you. You traded your daughter's home for your ego. He looked at the floor, jaw tight. I want sole custody, I said. And I'm filing for full financial discovery. Every account, every asset you hid, every dime is going to be accounted for. You'll ruin me, he whispered. I didn't blink. No, I'll reveal you. The ruin is yours to own. He didn't argue after that. He didn't raise his voice, didn't beg. He just looked at me like he was seeing someone new. And maybe he was. Because the woman he left behind, the one who cried through apologies and swallowed betrayal just to keep her family intact, she was gone. I opened the door. He walked out without another word. Later that night, my lawyer filed everything. Custody, discovery, formal fraud complaint. Sandler called me just before midnight. You ready for this? I looked down at Ava, her tiny hand curled into a fist against her cheek. More than ever. The courtroom smelled like old carpet and cold air. It was too bright, too quiet. Every sound, every shuffle of paper, every creak of a chair echoed louder than it should have. Jason sat across from me in a tailored suit that couldn't hide the shadows under his eyes. Isabel wasn't there. Maybe she finally understood that the fantasy he sold her came with a price. Or maybe she didn't want to watch the man she won unravel in public. I had Ava in my heart. I had facts in my hand, and I had nothing left to lose. My lawyer, Sandler, started with the timeline. He walked the court through the last 12 months, withdrawals from joint accounts, property transfers, misleading paperwork. Then came the emails, the text messages, the notarized documents I signed while in labor. She was in active labor when this deed was placed before her, Sandler said, voice calm but commanding. This was not a mutual agreement. It was a calculated act, timed at her most vulnerable moment, and it cannot be ignored. Jason's lawyer tried to spin it, called me emotionally unstable due to postpartum changes, said I was overreacting to what amounted to a marital miscommunication. I stayed quiet through all of it. I didn't cry, didn't flinch, didn't blink, because I wasn't just sitting there as a wife. I was a mother and a witness. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up slowly. The judge looked at me kindly. You may proceed. I swallowed hard, looked around the room, then I spoke, not just to the judge, but to the version of me who once stayed quiet for love. I was 9 months pregnant when my husband asked me to sign some paperwork. He said it was for the mortgage to make things easier while I was on leave. I was tired, in pain, and I trusted him. I signed without reading. I paused, took a breath. But I wasn't signing documents. I was signing away my home, my safety, my daughter's nursery, and he knew it. Jason wouldn't meet my eyes. I gave him years of my life. I gave him forgiveness after every betrayal, silence after every lie. And when I was delivering his child, he was finalizing a plan to give our house to another woman. I looked at the judge. My voice didn't shake. Today isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. I don't want sympathy. I want the truth to matter. And I want to protect my daughter from ever believing this is how love works. The judge was quiet for a long time. Then he ruled. Sole, legal, and physical custody to me. Jason was granted supervised visitation, pending a full psychological evaluation. The court ordered a forensic accountant to review all financial transactions. Jason was found liable for fraudulent transfer of marital property. The judge's final words stayed with me. Mr. White's actions reflect a gross abuse of marital trust. The court cannot condone manipulation disguised as legal process. Jason didn't say a word as we left the courtroom. His lawyer muttered something about appeals, but I could see it in Jason's face. He wasn't fighting anymore. Not because he'd changed, but because he knew the version of me he once controlled didn't exist anymore. Outside the courthouse, the sun was blinding. The air crisp. Ava was waiting with my friend Sarah in the car. When I opened the door, she reached for me, eyes wide, smile blooming. I kissed her cheeks and whispered, "It's done, baby. It's finally done." That night, I sat on the floor of our small new apartment, folding baby clothes and sipping tea. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was mine. No lies, no shadows, just me, my daughter, and the quiet hum of freedom. There would still be battles, co-parenting logistics, financial recovery, the long road of healing. But the war? That was over. And I had won. 2 months after the court ruling, I signed the lease on a new place. Not a luxury condo. Not a sprawling suburban home. Just a modest 2-bedroom with soft light, warm floors, and a view of the park where Ava would one day learn to ride a bike. I hung the curtains myself, put together the crib alone, painted the walls a soft sage green while Ava napped on a blanket nearby. Every corner of that apartment became a declaration. This is ours. No signatures could steal it. No man could erase it. This space, this peace. I built it from the ashes he left behind. Jason tried reaching out twice more. Once with an email that opened with, "I hope we can be civil for Ava's sake," and ended with a casual suggestion that we try co-parenting more flexibly, off the record. I didn't respond. The second time, he showed up unannounced again. He stood outside my building, holding a stuffed bear and a bag of groceries. He never made it past the front door. I opened it, looked him in the eye, and said, "You can leave those things here, but you don't come inside." He nodded, quiet for once. He knew. I rebuilt my career one project at a time. Took consulting gigs while Ava was still little. Then returned to my full-time role in marketing once I could afford childcare. The same network Jason used to call pointless lunches and office gossip became the reason I landed a leadership role within the year. I used to think marriage was my foundation. That love and his love was the ground I stood on. But it wasn't. It was me. It was always me. The house he gave away? It eventually went into foreclosure. Turns out, the lifestyle he tried to build with Isabel was a fantasy he couldn't afford. She left him 6 months later. I wasn't surprised. Some things can't be stolen. Not security, not respect, not love that's real. On Ava's first birthday, I threw her a little celebration in our new apartment. Just a few friends, a homemade cake, a banner I printed from my work laptop. She took her first steps that day. One wobbling, glorious moment that made everyone cheer. I caught her before she fell, held her tight, and laughed through tears. "She's walking," someone said. "No," I said, smiling. "She's rising." Late that night, after everyone had gone, I sat on the couch with a glass of wine. Ava slept peacefully in her crib. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the fridge and the soft wind through the open window. I looked around at everything I'd built, not out of bitterness, not out of vengeance, but out of clarity. Jason took the house, but I kept the foundation, and on it, I built something better, something honest, something mine.